Good afternoon, everyone. We will be discuss about the international trade, but before that, I will introduce my group mates. Please, James Paul Ramirez, Nico Madamo, Aliza Orienza, Mark Denver Zamora, Altea Ferrer, Carl Abbas, Chamber Fernandez, at Joel Albarida. So, in this chapter, you will learn about first, absolute and comparative advantage. Second, what happens when a country has an absolute advantage in all goods. Third, intra-industry trade between similar economies. And the last, the benefits of reducing barriers to international trade. Introduction. We live in a global marketplace. The food on your table might include fresh fruit from China, cheese from France, and bottled water from Scotland. Your wireless phone might have been made in Taiwan or Korea. The clothes you wear might be designed in Italy and manufactured in China. The toys you give to a child might have from India. The car you drive might come from Japan, Germany, or Korea. The gasoline in the tank may be refined from crude oil from Saudi Arabia, Mexico, or Nigeria. Many economists would express their attitudes toward international trade in an even more positive manner. The evidence that international trade confers overall benefits on economies is pretty strong. Trade has accompanied economic growth in the United States and around the world. Many national economies that have shown the most rapid growth in the last several decades. For example, Japan, South Korea, China, and India have done so by dramatically orienting their economies toward international trade. There is no modern example of a country that has shut itself off from world trade and yet prospered. To understand the benefit of trade or why we trade in the first place, we need to understand the concept of a comparative and absolute advantage.
Absolute and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is the ability of an actor to produce more of a good or service than a competitor. Sa absolute advantage, it refers to the business to produce a particular good better. At inilalarawan dito ang isang senaryo na kung saan ang isang entity ay pwede gumawa ng isang product sa isang mataas na kalidad para sa isang mas malaking kita kesa sa ibang competitor. Comparative advantage is the ability of an actor to produce a good or service for a lower opportunity cost than a competitor. Comparative advantage introduces opportunity cost as factor for analysis in choosing between different options for production diversification. Ang comparative advantage ay tumutukoy sa kakayahang gumawa ng kalakal o serbisyo sa mas mababang gastos at hindi kinakailangan ng mas malaking dami o kalidad. This is used to explain why companies, countries, or individuals can benefit from trade. Here's an example of absolute advantage. If Japan and Italy can both produce automobiles, but Italy can produce sports cars of a higher quality and at a faster rate with greater profit, then Italy is said to have an absolute advantage in that particular industry. Kasi, yung Italy yung nakapag-produce ng better particular good. At dahil meron silang sports cars, which has a higher quality than automobiles, and Italy will have a faster rate and greater profit than Japan. Here's an example for comparative advantage. Assume that China has enough resources to produce either smartphones or computers. China can produce 10 computers and 10 smartphones. Computers generate a higher profit. The opportunity cost is the difference in value loss from producing a smartphone rather than a computer. If China earns $100 for a computer and $50 for a smartphone, then the opportunity cost is $50. If China has to choose between producing computers over smartphones, they will select computers because computers generate a higher profit than smartphones.
Since wala si Denver, ako na lang yung magtatakal sa given slide for him. Base dyan sa table na nakikita nyo, it contains the differences of absolute and comparative advantage. So, let's proceed muna sa definition ng absolute advantage. A company is said to have this advantage when it is impeccably more efficient. Sa comparative advantage naman, it is a company is said to have disadvantage if he is more efficient in comparison to others. Sa proponents naman, si Adam Smith, yung nag-came up with this theory in 1976. And then sa comparative advantage naman, ang nag-propose ng theory na ito is David Ricardo was the first economist to develop this theory. Sa assumption naman, sa absolute advantage, assumption here includes trade balance, no trade, no FOP, no trade barriers, persistent return to scale. Sa comparative advantage naman, yung assumptions niya is two countries producing one product, labor is only FOP, constant cost to return, etc. So sa benefit naman, sa absolute advantage, trade is not mutually beneficial and benefits only one country. Sa comparative advantage naman, trade over here is mutually beneficial and benefits both the countries. Sa cost factor naman, sa absolute advantage, cost is the primary factor and not the opportunity cost. Sa comparative advantage naman, it is, yung cost factor na is, opportunity cost is the primary factor under consideration. Sa allocation, sa absolute advantage, resource allocation is not relevant as it does not consider opportunity cost. Sa comparative advantage naman, because of opportunity cost as cost factor, resource allocation play role. Sa what it tells, helps in understanding trade pattern, and sa comparative advantage naman is helps in understanding direction of international trade. Sa mutuality, the trade here is not mutual or reciprocal. And then sa comparative advantage naman, this theory is mutual and reciprocal. And we must always keep in mind that when a country or an economy has an absolute advantage, it is more efficient than other countries at producing a specific good or service. Therefore, it can produce this good or service at a lower actual cost. However, comparative advantage measures opportunity cost instead of actual cost. In other words, it measures what a country has to give up to produce a certain good or service. What happens when a country has an absolute advantage in all goods? What happens to the possibilities for trade if one country has an absolute advantage in everything? This is typical for high-income countries that often have well-educated workers, technologically advanced equipment, and the most up-to-date production process. These high-income countries can produce all products with fewer resources than a low-income country. If the high-income country is more productive across the board, will will there still be gains from trade? Good students of Ricardo understand that trade is about mutually beneficial exchange. Even when one country has an absolute advantage in all products, trade can still benefit both sides. This is because gains from the trade come from specializing in one's comparative advantage. Kailangan natin tandaan na even when a country has high levels of productivity in all goods, it can still benefit from trade. Gains from trade come about as a result of comparative advantage. By specializing in a good that it gives up, up the least to produce, a country can produce more and offer that additional output for sale. If other countries specialize in the area of their comparative advantage as well and trade, the highly productive country is able to benefit from a lower opportunity cost of production in other countries.
For example, a trade where the US exports 4,000 refrigerators to Mexico in exchange for 1,800 pairs of shoes would benefit both sides. in the sense that both countries would be able to consume more of both goods than in a world without trade. Trade allows each country to take advantage of lower opportunity costs in the other country. If Mexico wants to produce more refrigerators without trade, it must face its domestic opportunity costs and reduce shoe production. If Mexico instead produces more shoes and then trades for refrigerators made in the United States, where the opportunity cost of producing refrigerators is lower, Mexico can in effect take advantage of the lower opportunity cost of refrigerators in the United States. Conversely, when the United States specializes in its comparative advantage of refrigerator production and trades for shoes produced in Mexico, international trade allows the United States to take advantage of the lower opportunity cost of shoe production in Mexico. Intra-industry trade between similar economies. What are the advantages of intra-industry trade between similar economies? It produces economic gains because it allows workers and firms to learn and innovate on particular products and often to focus on very particular parts of the value chain. There are a number of possible advantages of intra-industry trade. Both nations can take advantage of extreme specialization and learning in certain kinds of cars with certain traits, like gas-efficient cars, luxury cars, sport utility vehicles, higher and lower quality cars, and so on.
So what are the benefits of trade barriers in the economy? Increased consumption of local goods, duty tax increases the overall cost of imported goods and services. Duty tax increases the overall cost of imported goods and services. When the government levies this tax on imports, it aims to discourage local consumers from importing. As a result, the consumption of locally produced goods increases since there are fewer substitute or alternative goods. Siyempre, 'di ba, mas mataas ang tax ng imported products, meaning isa din yung factor to increase the prices of imported products. And once na tumaas na ang price of imported products, mas madami na ang tatangkilik sa mga localized products. Siyempre, one of the basis ng mga consumers is yung price. Kung ano yung mababa, doon sila. Increased domestic employment. As the consumption of local goods increases, so does the demand. Siyempre, since mataas na yung demand ng localized goods or products, dyan na papasok yung demand. So, pag mataas ang demand, need pa ng madamihang products. And pag may demand, siyempre may domestic employment. Magkakaroon ng trabaho and mas dadami pa yung mabibigyan ng trabaho dahil sa trade barriers. Siyempre, malaki na yung consumption. The more yung demand, more products and more employments. As the consumption of local goods increases, so does the demand. To satisfy the growing consumer demand, domestic producers have to produce more products. With more jobs available, unemployment rates will go down. And previously unemployed people will have an income they can use to improve their welfare. Enhance national security. The national security of a government that heavily imports military weapons become promise should the exporting country restrict the export of the weapons. To prevent this from happening, a government, especially that of a developed country, tries to encourage domestic production of defense equipment. It also adopts a trade embargo or bans the importation of the equipment. As an example, in 2013, the Obama administration issued an executive order banning the importation of military weapons that had previously been exported from the United States. The goal was to keep them out of wrong hands and subsequently enhance national security. Enlarge national revenue. Levying tariffs on imported goods and services is a strategy governments can use to increase national revenue. The duty from importers goes directly to the government's revenue collection agency. Although tariffs are generally designed to discourage importation, some goods such as apparel and household appliances are so essential importers won't give them up. When the government raises tariffs on such goods or starts taxing goods that were previously imported free of duty, it collects more revenue. The National Priorities Project, a non-profit organization that focuses on federal budget research projects that custom duties will contribute about $33 billion to the projected 3.3 trillion tax revenue for the year 2015. Improve consumer protection. The government sets import regulations on some consumer goods to ensure they are safe for domestic use or consumption. When importing foods, medicines, or cosmetics into the US, for instance, importers must ensure the manufacturers, producers, or handlers of these products are registered with the US Food and Drug Administration. The imports must also be inspected by the FDA before they are allowed into the country. Siguro some of you guys are aware naman na that some imported products are harmful to the body. Di na bago sa pandinig natin yung mga instances wherein some products are contaminated. Since the government sets import regulations on some consumer goods to ensure they are safe for domestic use or consumption, hindi na basta-basta makakalusot yung mga contaminated products, which will improve consumer protection. Increase or decrease of foreign trade of the country. Dito naman, mas ipaprioritize na lang ng government yung mataas ang demand ng imported products or yung mas need ng ating kababayan. Syempre, 'di ba, in order to import products, you need money. Tapos hindi pala in demand yung yun, edi another ways na naman. Not just in money but also the product itself. And we all know naman na in every consumption we made is need or required ng money. The last one is, with the help of trade barriers, we can decide what kind of goods and how much of each. So yun nga, kailangan na lang ng yung mga mas kailangan na lang ng kababayan natin yung i-import nila sa last slide. So in this slide, I'm going to tackle kung maganda nga ba ang trade barriers in one country. Syempre, we all know naman na lahat ng bagay ay may pros and cons or advantages and disadvantages. Are trade barriers good? Trade barriers such as tariffs have been demonstrated to cause more economic harm than benefit. They raise prices and reduce availability of goods and services, thus resulting in lower income, reduced employment, and lower economic output. Economists generally agree that trade barriers are not good for a country's economy. One main reason for this consensus is that trade barriers decrease overall efficiency and productivity within economies that are affected by them. In that case, they may not be as harmful to a country's economy. So yun nga, they raises prices and reduce availability of goods and services. Syempre, di ba, tataas ang demand ng localized products which will result to higher prices. And syempre, since di na gaano kadami yung availability ng ibang imported products due to trade barriers, another results na naman nito is mas madaling magkaubusan ng localized products or reduce availability of goods and services. Ang pinaka-apektado sa trade barriers is yung mga mahihirap na countries. Trade barriers generally favor rich countries because these countries tend to set international trade policies and standards. Pati na din yung mga mamamayan apektado rito because trade barriers cause a limited choice of products and therefore would force customers to pay higher prices and accept inferior quality.
What is the benefits of reducing barriers to international trade? Increased competition, lower trade and FDI barriers of final goods can strengthen competition in the liberalized sectors. This can help firms exploit economies of scale, improve efficiency, absorb foreign technology, and innovate. Reducing barriers to international trade can boost our economic exports and increasing economic growth even further. So, Before you pass on expanding into foreign markets, consider some of these potential advantages of international trade: increased revenues, decreased competition, longer product lifespan, easier cash flows management, better risk management benefiting from currency exchange, access to export financing, disposal of surplus goods. Next. Why do governments use trade barriers? Government use trade barriers to control the foreign trade in one country. Trade barriers are mainly to protect the local producers from the high competition of the world. Trade barriers make some restrictions of the international MNCs, reducing the internal competition. So using trade barriers will cut imports, thus reducing trade deficit.